You're with CNBC Africa. I'm Chris Bishop now. Welcome back to our coverage and analysis of the budget speech today. It was certainly a big one. Certainly a lot of talking points in there. Now, Finance Minister Tito Mboweni says South Africa's income tax system is progressive and the adjustments he reflects this. We'll talk a little bit more about that soon. Mboweni announced some declines in personal income tax, but there may, as much as there's tax relief, also, there's going to be an increase in so-called sin taxes. They're going to go up again. So the government's sort of giving you with one hand and taking back with another. Let's just have a quick listen before we get to this discussion about what exactly he's planning for us to pay extra this year.
From today, a 340 milliliter can of beer or cider will cost only an extra 8 cents. Only. A 750 milliliter bottle of wine will cost only an extra 14 cents. A 750 milliliter bottle of sparkling wine, Minister Mbalula, will only cost an extra 61 cents. A bottle of 750 milliliter spirits, including whiskey, gin, or vodka, will rise by R2.89. A packet of 20 cigarettes a packet of 20 cigarettes, irrespective of the nice smile the Deputy President is giving me, will be an extra 74 cents. A 25 gram of piped tobacco, with due respect to some retired people, will cost 40 cents more. A 23 gram cigar will cost an extra R6.73. I'm happy again to report to this House that there is no increase in the price of sorghum beer. In line with the Department of Health policy, we'll start taxing heated tobacco products. For example, Hubbly, Bubbly. The rate will be set at 75% of the rate of cigarettes. Electronic cigarettes, or so-called vapes, will be taxed from 2021. To adjust for inflation, the fuel levy goes up by 25 cents per liter, of which 16 cents is for the general fuel levy and 9 cents is for the road accident fund. Despite this increase, the liabilities of the road accident fund are forecast to exceed 600 billion rand by 2022-23. We need to take urgent steps to reduce this risk to the fiscus and bring about a more equitable way of sharing these costs. One option is to introduce compulsory third-party insurance, and we should debate this as quickly as possible.
So there was a lot of laughter around the desk here. Not normally something you get when there's tax issues being discussed, but everyone around the desk here agreed with me that perhaps Tito was mellowing a bit in his old age. But anyway, our panel today is Samke Mhlongo, founder and chief executive of Next Chapter, Ricardo Teixeira, chief operating officer at Wealth Advisors BDO, and also with us is Zweli Mabhoza, founder and director of Priority Tax Solutions. Thank you very much for coming. Now, I'll start with you, Samke. I mean, I think most people breathed a sigh of relief. I was reading the stuff up to the budget, and they were saying that it's going to put up income tax and VAT. There's no other way out of it. Everyone can breathe a sigh of relief tonight. But do you think that, that's it? I mean, do you think that there's not other taxes going to come our way next year, or what? Or was he just trying to give us some relief in these difficult times?
I think he didn't have much room to raise taxes from, because as much as he could have raised the tax rates, what happens to your tax base? You've got rising unemployment, meaning that your tax base is shrinking, and a rising tax rate would not have necessarily translated to rising tax revenues. And I think by taking the decision not to raise income taxes and also to keep company taxes the same, what Minister Mboweni was doing is actually then providing a type of stimulus into the economy and giving the private sector the opportunity to then boost the South African GDP growth rates, which are projected at 0.9% for this tax year. And the shift then was more towards the public sector in terms of that fiscal consolidation and tightening those belts. And I think he had to walk a tight line between injecting some stimulus into the economy, but also appeasing Moodys. As many people have said, this was very much a Moodys budget, because as much as we may have some citizens of the country unhappy with some of the pronouncements from the budget speech, we would have paid a much higher price had Moodys downgraded us on the 27th of March, which may still happen on the 1st of November. But for now, as I've been hearing throughout the day, we've managed to kick the can once again down the road.
Until November, you think, maybe?
Until we run out of road.
But two things I could ask you, Ricardo, and I'll come around to you as well, Zweli. But I mean, do you think that the tax take would have actually gone down dramatically if you'd have upped income tax and corporate tax again?
Absolutely, Chris. Yeah. I think it's without any shadow of any doubt that tax morality is on that brink of actually getting to a point where actually, if taxes were increased, you would have sort of a huge fall-off in tax sort of buoyancy and a contribution to the fiscus. So I think the balance that our Minister of Finance was able to achieve was a very elegant solution, where, as Samke has alluded to, there's been no changes to the taxes at face value. I think your question is quite pointed, is that there will be, I think, slight changes along the fringes on our tax base, particularly on the corporates. We saw some news around the cess losses, how those will be limited, interest rate and net expenditure set off, and around Section 7C and the like. So I think just on the fringes there will be slight tweaks, but at the face of it, Chris, you're quite right. There's been no tax changes.
So Zweli, I mean, one thing he was touting, he was saying there'll be some slight relief for some people. Teachers on 400,000 rand a year will get an extra 1,500 back. But I mean, is that going to make that much of a difference to people in these very, very stressed economic times?
Look, I don't think that is going to make any big difference for them, because I mean, this is just as small as 3,000 for the whole year. I mean, if you take that, you divide it by 12, it's really very small. So I don't think that is going to make that much of a difference. But I would like to just maybe add on the comments that have just been made here. I think on the corporate tax side, yes, he mentioned that the intention is to just broaden the tax base and also to reduce the tax rate in future. So, and I think that the market is going to watch that very carefully, because now we're sitting at 28%. So hopefully next year they're going to take the tax rate to a level lower than that. They've mentioned two things that they are going to be looking at. It's going to be tax losses, where they say that it's going to be limited to 80% of tax losses. So in other words, if a corporate has got tax losses, they can only utilize 80% of those tax losses going forward. And the other thing that they said that they are going to be also looking at is the deduction of interest. So, and that is going to hit those businesses that rely a lot on where they've got a terrible gearing in terms of the interest rates. So if you look at your equity to debt ratio, you need to look at that in that context.
And also, I mean, I was speaking this morning at the Meetings Africa conference to some of the Zambians, and I was talking about the low and the high tax, or nearly 40% we pay here, and the small base was about 5 million, is it not, in South Africa? And he said, well, you're lucky, we've only got 600,000 and we pay the same amount of tax. And I said, why? And they said, a lot of people evade, no one wants to pay. A lot of people are informal traders. But do you think that he's got anywhere else to get money, you think, to make up this huge, it's quite a huge shortfall between the expenditure and the tax take? And where else can he get money from?
Well, if he manages to implement the fiscal consolidation around particularly the public sector wage bill, then he will be able to meet that target. However, the concern is around the fact that even though this budget was quite detailed in terms of when and where he's going to cut spend, the concern is that you're still seeing a growing debt to GDP ratio from about 60% where we're sitting now, which has nearly tripled over the past 10 years, to about 70%, 80% over the next medium term. And I think that is where you then want to see an impetus in the structural reforms, because this is not a case of us suddenly going on a crash diet because we are now staring down the barrel of a downgrade gun, but rather structural reforms that will say that greater efficiency in terms of how taxes are collected, how taxes are spent going forward in a sustainable manner is what will then give not only Moodys and the other credit ratings agencies, but rather the global investment community comfort around South Africa's financial well-being going forward.
Because Ricardo, that's one of the vague things about this budget that bothered me earlier when I was watching. I thought, when you say that you're going to cut back 160 billion on the civil service, that's a lot of money.
It's material.
And then they say in the medium term. I said, what is that? Is that 2 years, 5 years,
3 years.
10 years? I don't know. I mean, but and how is it going to happen? I mean, the unions, I've heard them quoted saying that no, they're ready to fight it every step of the way. But even so, surely it's doable, isn't it? But when?
So I think that he was quite clear as the minister. He set out that it's a 3-year time horizon in terms of achieving that target. I think the message, though, is positive in that it's not a unilateral sort of let's cull and reduce headcount in the government sort of employment sector, but it's actually one of saying let's look at it carefully. And I think he made very clear comments around, pointed comments around the level of earnings and the level of expenditure and in that wage bill. So it's more an efficiency strategy, Chris, I think that he will look to achieve. And I think that's a good message for our country. It's positive. It is very clear that Eskom and SAA will continue to be supported, but limited, and in light of the reduced wage bill.
But also as well, I mean, another aspect of the budget was that they've set a lot more aside for investigators for the NPA. They say they want to clamp down on corruption. They want to stop this wastage. They want to stop this looting, if you like, of funds. I mean, do you think it's enough? And we're talking about, what, 900 extra investigators, I think, what I saw. Do you think that's enough?
Look, I think that the challenge that they're going to have is to say, currently, do you have sufficient skills to undertake those kinds of investigation? Because, I mean, I think that is the right thing to do, to say, let's focus on because the leakage that you get from the looting that you see, it's quite big. If you look at the figures that come from both irregular expenditure and fruitless and wasteful expenditure, it's quite a lot. When someone is actually spending on irregular expenditure, someone has been given a budget and someone decides to say, you know what, I'm going to spend more than what has been given to me. The reality is each and every minister is the CEO of that particular department. If you think about it, how can you spend more than what is given to you? And I think we need to see action, because when we talk about cutting costs and saving about 160 billion, you need to back up that with action plans to say this is what we're going to do. Because you cannot just be saying that, no, we're going to actually cut the cost by 160 billion and you're only going to think later on about what you need to do. So you need to be very clear in terms of what you're going to do. Because yes, I understand that we're trying to avoid the downgrading from rating agencies. But I mean, rating agencies, they're also looking for practical plans to say, how are we going to do that?
So Samke, I talk to you now. I mean, you were talking about Moodys and kicking the can down the road. I mean, some of the phrases that Tito Mboweni was throwing out today, he said, we've got about 18 months to kickstart the economy or else. Sometimes these things can be, you know, just cheap words. I don't know. But what do you think the chances are of it happening?
I think the chances of a downgrade certainly in March are quite low, and I think that 18-month time frame he's referring to is that in March, if we were downgraded to a negative outlook, which gives us about 18 months. So that's the time frame in which he has to actually implement and show results of this policy statement that he made today. And the next review will then be in November. That'll be after the midterm budget speech, where he'll then be able to report on the successes of the policies that or the plans rather, that he pronounced today. So I think we'll be able to definitely in March stave off a downgrade. And then depending on the results and that we've achieved in October, then we'll either be downgraded or kept on that negative outlook in November. And what a lot of people don't actually realize is that the downgrade is not once off. It doesn't mean that will just be sub-investment grade, that's it. You can actually get worse junk as you go on. And as people tend to think that it's just black and white, we either investment grade or not. But there are levels to our junkenness, if you want to put it that way, of our sovereign credit ratings. And once we start going down that road, we then risk getting to default status, where you now have to start talking IMF, and then we'll really feel the pain of the decisions or lack of decisions that have been made over the past 10, 15 years.
Well, speaking about pain, I mean, a lot of people in the property market say they've been feeling pain at the moment. It's difficult moving houses, etc. Prices have been going down. But this thing of scrapping duty for under R1 million, do you think that that's going to give people a bit of a fillip when it comes to selling houses and getting the property market moving again?
So I think it depends on which market you look at. And I think most certainly would have a positive impact. If you look at our average house prices in Gauteng, I think it's way above that R1 million mark. So it's really not going to have a huge knock-on effect. But in certain areas of South Africa, it may well sort of add to that sort of demand for property. But I think at the end of the day, Chris, it's about putting money back in the consumer's pocket. I think that's the balancing act that our minister has been able to achieve. So as much as tax changes, there is a bit of money on the table, and there's a big effort on cutting back expenditure, but there is going to be something to...
Talking about putting money or taking people's money out of consumers' pockets, the 25-cent tax on plastic bags. I mean, once again, the government's trying to sort of get rid of plastic bags. But I remember the efforts, was it 15 years ago when it first started coming, in I think Alec Irwin's day? Yeah. And every time I go into a supermarket, I still see piles of plastic bags. I don't know. Do you think it's ever going to take root? Do you think 25 cents is going to make a difference on a plastic bag?
Look, I think you have to look at it from two sides. One, you have to look at it on the side of whether that is going to make a difference in terms of adding money to the fiscus. The second challenge that you have is to say, if we say the objective of putting this tax is to deal with certain environmental issues, are we dealing with those? I remember, as you say, more than 10 years ago when they were actually introducing these kinds of taxes, some of the advisors, they were actually saying that maybe you need to ring fence this revenue for that particular purpose. Unfortunately, it goes to this big pot and you don't even see the impact of that revenue in terms of addressing the concerns. It's the same thing that you have when you look at carbon tax. Carbon tax is going to generate now more than 1 billion, close to 2 billion. But I don't think that it's going to be addressing environmental issues.
Just one last issue I'd like to throw out to everybody here that intrigued me. When he started talking about churches, and it's not just to have an ecclesiastical name, but basically, when he started talking about churches saying that they were going to, he said he wanted them to operate under the tax regime. But I wasn't, and this 36,000 threshold he was talking about, I didn't quite get it. Do you think that he's ever really going to regulate churches, you think, as the finance ministry? I don't know. I think it's possible.
I don't think that there'll be a regulation of churches as such. More than anything else, what is happening is that you need to just apply the law properly. Yeah. You have what is called PBOs, and generally a church would fall under PBOs. But there are other rules around that. To say, for example, if you've got someone who is earning, then that person must be properly taxed. Currently, I don't think that the South African Revenue Service have managed to get their hands around people who are operating in that space to say that if, for example, we've got a bishop, okay, and a bishop is paid a certain amount of money, then are they declaring sufficient taxes? What happens, for example, if someone just decides to put a tent there and then someone is donating a car? Yeah. You know, all of those things, they've got certain tax implications, but I think the main thing is to say, now the churches, for them to retain their tax exemption status, they need to make sure that their members comply.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, do you think they'll ever see a day when churches are sitting there filling out tax returns every February or not? I don't know.
How are you going to measure the income of an organization that primarily operates on cash?
Exactly, because that's the thing, isn't it?
I mean, I think Zweli make a great comment around the legislation of the PBO, and I think that's what it is. And it's the theme I pick up within the budget's speech, Chris, is largely around broadening the tax base, being efficient in collecting it. And churches may just be one area of efficient collection that you'd hone into as an example. But I think there's a lot of examples in our country around where the fair tax is not being collected as it should be.
Just to wrap up then, we're running out of time, unfortunately. Starting with you, Samke. So overall, You think we might have kicked the can down the road to November in terms of a downgrade, but overall, your gut feeling about what you've heard today?
Well, I don't even need to rely on my gut feeling. You just need to look at the currency and the market's reaction to today's budget speech to know that the markets and global investors were satisfied with Minister Mboweni's budget speech. And my personal opinion was that there was an air about his delivery today that said that there's support for what he's talking about, and therefore a greater likeliness or likelihood of him actually implementing what he's saying. And that says to me that within the ANC structures or within the NEC, Luthuli House, and perhaps those structures that used to hinder him or tie his hands in terms of action are now coming on board with what he's proposing. And I think that may also have contributed to why you saw the positive reaction from the markets.
Ricardo? Wrap up.
I think a wrap up for me, Chris, is one that it's a positive message for the South African consumer. I think the message is one, there's no significant changes, just keep doing what you're doing. I think largely keep your house in order, because the efficiency of SARS is going to change, and there's a lot of resources allocated to that.
Really?
Look, I think that it's very important now to actually see those plans being implemented. One thing that worries me is what we hear and what we see now when you look at Eskom. Eskom will tell you to switch off your lights. The question that you have to ask, how is Eskom going to make money? Because Eskom cannot continuously be making money out of bailouts.
And
They need to be profitable at some
few
point.
businesses in the world that try to dissuade you from using their products, is it not? Anyway. Well, thank you very much indeed to my esteemed guest. That's Samke Mhlongo, founder and chief executive of Next Chapter, Ricardo Teixeira, chief operating officer, Wealth Advisors BDO, and also Zweli Mabhoza, the founder and director of Priority Tax Solutions.